This video is going to be talking about all of the characters from Final Fantasy Record Keeper, and somewhat of the story so far. If you don't want spoilers for Final Fantasy Record Keeper, then I highly recommend that you don't watch this video. I know it's slightly counterproductive of me to actually want to talk about Final Fantasy Record Keeper's characters, the exclusive characters I mean, and the story itself. Unfortunately though, I haven't uploaded videos for the chapters that I'm going to talk about. So, if you don't want spoilers for those videos I'm going to be uploading in advance, I would highly recommend that you not watch this video. So, let us begin where I start. Alright. So, first off, you're probably wondering about what Final Fantasy Record Keeper is. Well, it's a game that was published around 5 years ago by Square Enix, and this company that was also helping in the development of another game known as All the Bravest. Now, this game uses the same sprite formula and same sprites for some of the characters. However, the only difference being there are many more characters and the story is very different. And the sprites formula is very, very similar to that of Final Fantasy IV, which if you have played that game, you will understand exactly what I mean by that. Final Fantasy IV was released to the US as Final Fantasy II for some reason. Perhaps translation issues, perhaps they only had Google Translate. But we're not talking about Final Fantasy IV. We are talking about Final Fantasy Record Keeper. So what is it? Well, if you remember my Digimon Link series, it's kind of like a best of the Final Fantasy games sort of bring along together. Except, like most other spin-off games that appear within Final Fantasy and its spin-offs, it does feature many of the characters in a different setting. However, unlike those, it sets them in their same settings. However, this is basically an encapsulation of all of those stories in one game, geniusly. And I will explain. If you do not know, none of the Final Fantasy main titles actually, unless they have a sequel or prequel, actually correlate with each other. There may be simple nods to other Final Fantasy games or certain characters, or they may have similar tropes and creatures. They do not take place in the same universe. Take Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy IV, for instance. Final Fantasy II has a character named Ricard Highwind, and he has an adoptive son named Kain. Now, in Final Fantasy IV, Kain Highwind had a father named Ricard Highwind, who was a Dragoon hero, which is kind of similar to Final Fantasy II, if you think about it. The only difference being that Kain's not dead in Final Fantasy IV. Now, to go through, we're going to talk about all the characters that you can know about from Final Fantasy Record Keeper. To start off, there are different characters that you can play as, and then characters that appear as bosses or simply just sideline characters. First off, there's the Keeper, also known as Tyro, or also known simply as whatever you name him as. They are basically your character, even though they are simply a boy. Now, the Keeper character is very much so similar as to the default sort of protagonist. However, they do have their own personality like most. Now you may be wondering what sort of things are they good at. Well, they're pretty much an all-rounder character. They can do anything. And by anything, I mean they can equip anything. They can use any kind of spell. They can pretty much equip any kind of armor. They are literally an all-rounder. However, there is a difference. They cannot equip a weapon called a Keyblade, and that is simply because Keyblades are not normally accessible unless a Kingdom Hearts collaboration is within effect. Other than that mild exception, the Keeper can equip anything. And he is basically a young child, so to speak, around 13 or 14 I would surmise, and he basically is the equivalent of the Keeper, I guess, of the archives. He is the caretaker. Then there is Alara, a mysterious girl who is sealed with a magicite, and according to her Materia, which you can get, which is called To Be Human, I have a suspicion that she isn't actually human, and I do not have anything to back up this theory with, except for a simple naming variable of a Materia, which may just be a simple red herring. Now before you brand me as a heretic or whatnot you call me to be, Bear this in mind, I'm talking about Record Keeper and its definite facts, and maybe a couple theories, because I have not finished the full game's story as is myself. So, take everything I say with a few pinches of salt. Actually, a lot of salt if you can. But basically, Alara can telepathically speak to Tyro, which is going to be the name for the Keeper I use since it is the default. Which, ironically, Tyro means new at something, an inexperienced person, so to speak. However, Alara has no memories, unfortunately, which deems her as suspiciously highly potent with magic, albeit she does not have any real memory of what she can do. However, she can hear voices from corrupted paintings, as has been heard of. Now, there are many other things to take into account. We could go all day talking about how Alara could be some sort of god creature of magicite and all that. And she does have immense proficiency with summoning and dancing. And white magic, for that matter. However, we're not here for theories, we're here for definite facts. So let us continue. There is Biggs and Wedge. Now, Biggs and Wedge are a common trope within Final Fantasy games. There is often going to be a duo of Biggs and Wedge. In Final Fantasy VII, Biggs and Wedge were two members of the Avalanche terrorist team. In Final Fantasy VIII, they're two minor soldiers that you have to deal with. They appear as bosses near the very beginning. However, they're not exactly as important in most games as they are in Final Fantasy Record Keeper. Now, none of the other Biggs or Wedge characters actually make an appearance in this game because they're simply mostly minor characters. They're not playable, but in the Record Dungeons, which is the main story, they appear as NPCs, as always, just to keep to the authenticity. Biggs is a chauvinist, so to speak, and is best based with night abilities and heavy physical attack, so to speak, which is featured by his Wicked Press, which deals over the damage cap of 9999. Now, Biggs is very much so very powerful. He can deal some quite heavy damage and can also take some pretty hard hits himself. He is a very well-rounded character if you want to use him. His speed isn't that great, but besides that, he is a good tank, and also certain abilities can allow him to help him draw damage away from his other allies. Now, Wedge, on the other hand, I would say is a little less three-dimensional of a character. His character development isn't exactly as on point as Biggs, Alara, or even Tyro, or even Dr. Mog for that matter. In fact, he's pretty much just the sidekick who says literally nothing, likes animals, and is basically just a sad rehashing of Alara in a respect. Since Alara does have a certain fondness for animals herself, well, it's hard to really explain this in a way that isn't insulting. But, so to speak, his character development is not that good, but I can tell that his development is based heavily on the Thief class. However, his speed is heavily rivaled by other characters, which makes it even more questionable of why he has such poor stats. It may be a similar reason as to why the core classes also have poor performance themselves. However, the core classes are a whole different story to deal with, so we're not going to focus on those, since they are pretty much common tropes within almost any Final Fantasy game you can find. Dr. Mog is the head of the Royal Archives, one of the two branches, the other being the Royal Arcanium, in which Biggs and Wedge originate from. They are Arcanium agents. Now, Dr. Mog can be a little out there at times, but he simply is a head historian of everything. He is a very influential figure within the historical records, and guides Tyro to become a much better keeper. However, he too has his faults, and can react a little violently to certain stimuli, which makes it slightly more humorous when he does. And so it's only natural he would act this way, because he simply knows the knowledge. That does not mean he actually has seen it. So, as I've said, he's not exactly the best at handling excitement. He can also become a little bit prideful. However, he is highly proficient in magic. Namely, all types of magic. In fact, one of his record materia makes it so that he's able to be highly proficient in all sorts of magic. Even more powerful. Which makes him extremely useful if you really have the patience to train him up. However, like most of the characters from Final Fantasy Record Keeper, with the exception of Tyro and Alara, he has a quite limited equipment set, and as well as an exclusive skill set. So that means he simply is powerful statistics-wise. However, you're not going to get the best out of him, which is an issue because of good stats, but lackluster performance, so to speak. Now, I've mentioned all of the protagonist characters of Final Fantasy Record Keeper. However, there are other characters that appear as antagonists and even NPCs. Of course, a common trope that is returning is Naming Way. Naming Way is a special type of creature that appears within many Final Fantasy games. The best way I remembered is it literally helps you name people. And in this game, the Naming Way isn't a major character, but she simply is there to help you change your name if you're not happy with it. For free, which is very nice of you, Naming Way. Thank you. However, in Final Fantasy IV's remake, there are a little storyline that occurs within the main story. It's not exactly important or crucial, but basically it starts with Naming Way not being able to rename Cecil, simply because the voice acting says his name is Cecil, it would contradict. So, in saying this, he gives up and then becomes a different something way, a cartography way or a mapping way, and then he loses his pens and papers. And so he has to become, oh, I just realized that, I apologize, but does it have, I think it has Reflect currently. Oh dear. Vivi's been killing everyone, it appears. I apologize, Vivi, I did not realize that. The Naming Way would simply keep changing and then into Vagrant Way, which would help you look at the bestiary, and then it eventually gave up altogether. Oh dear, more attacks. And so, basically, the little storyline and joke was that because it couldn't rename you, it kept changing its way, so to speak. And the ultimate outcome is unknown to what happens to it. Hopefully he becomes a Naming Way again. Who knows? But it will have to do. Now, that is a minor character that has been a common trope, but there's another common trope character who is to appear again, and that is Cid. No, I'm not talking about Cid from Final Fantasy IV or Final Fantasy VII, though I do like Final Fantasy IV's Cid a lot. And Final Fantasy VII Cid is a shameful character. A very sad, sad character, which I wish he would simply move on from his sadness, so to speak. However, I did not write Final Fantasy VII, so I will only have to just put that down under a rock and just not complain about it. However, there is a Cid in Final Fantasy Record Keeper, and his role is to be an engineer, so to speak, similar to Final Fantasy IV's Cid. He helps you out with tutorials just like Dr. Mog does. However, he is not a party member, but merely is an influential owner of an airship, just like most Cid characters are. However, he is not able to fight in battle, like some Cids are. And he is very much so well versed with other things other than just mechanics. He is also well versed with equipment and even magicite, which makes him highly useful when Dr. Mog has a problem. Now we are going to move on to another character which is really well hidden, and that is in fact in the item exchange. If you remember my Onion Knight video, I went into an exchange area called Kite's exchange area. And if you remember, you never saw who Kite was. Well, I will show you a quick visual of who Kite is to the best of my abilities, and you can edit this in post-production, as you have for everything else, I hope. And basically, Kite is a vagrant, and a vagrant is someone who moves around a lot. And he basically is a trader and a treasure hunter. Unfortunately, he's not going to stay at the archives anytime soon. However, the story behind this character is that Tyro and Alara are on a walk in the shop looking for Dr. Mog when they see that Dr. Mog and Kite are having a bit of a disagreement. And Kite says something that worded in a certain way that makes Tyro worry that he's threatening to kill Dr. Mog. However, Dr. Mog and Kite later write this off as just the way he talks. So, a little trivia for Kite. And is Kite a boy or girl? I have no clue. You can look that up yourself, because I'm simply too lazy to. Now, we've talked about all the people who are willing to help you, and people who are on your side, and people who are neutral. However, there are some people who are out for blood. Now, I know you're going to be thinking, what? people out to stop me and do other bad things to me, like in the game besides just the normal cliche villains of Final Fantasy Record Keeper? Who could you be referring to? Who could I be referring to? Oh, you have no idea. Again, I said there are huge spoilers to this game, so you better think carefully. So, there is a character from the Royal Arcanium, the same branch where Biggs and Wedge originate, and he is known as Shadowsmith. Now you may be asking, who the heck is Shadowsmith? Well, Shadowsmith is actually the head of the Royal Arcanium, and he's also the main villain of Final Fantasy Record Keeper's canon's story. Now, you may be asking what he has to accomplish, and that is a good question. I'm yet to determine that myself. However, with some very concise research I've done, we have two villains along with him. They are apparently Magicite creatures. Now, you may be asking what their names are. I'm afraid I do not remember off the top of my head. Well, these villains that I refer to that work alongside the Shadowsmith are no more than Magicite. Now I will explain what Magicite is. Magicite is basically a crystallization of summonable creatures. And if you don't know quite what that means, well, allow me to explain further. Magicite is basically what gives you the ability to summon powerful creatures, such as Bahamut or Shiva, for instance. However, the Shadowsmith has taken control of these creatures, allowing them to have their own malicious thoughts, and they appear as hooded figures with little to no characteristics except for hooded man and hooded woman. According to the lore of the game, they were actually designed by Wedge. And also, according to the lore, Wedge's designs are often revised. So, apologies, Wedge, for the hate that is coming upon you, but you are statistically an awful character in general. Now, continuing this escapade, it later comes to my attention that some characters are actually taken under the influence of some of these creatures. They are named under different names under different Final Fantasy games. They are called Aeons in Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XIII. However, in Final Fantasy IV, they are referred to as Eidolons. And if you're wondering if it's pronounced Eidolons or Eidolons, it's pronounced Eidolons. Do not worry. I did some research on that too. So there you have it. You know all about Final Fantasy Record Keeper's characters. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for the story as we both dive into it. So I would like to say for now, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye! Wait, before you go, Sans told me when he was editing this that there's a secret character I never encountered, and they're from the record lab, if you remember, and they're actually Cid's younger sister named Materia. She doesn't like Cid too much for unexplained reasons. But yeah, that's the actual other character I just never found out about. Yeah, she may have been cut content, technically. But yeah, that's all. Bye!